As to visual criteria, there are two I can adopt. There is the ordinary experience of seeing my hand rise and come towards my eye, and this experience, of course, is different from seeing two things meet, say, two fingertips. On the other hand, I can use as a criterion for my finger moving towards my eye what I see when I look in a mirror and see my finger nearing my eye. If that place on my body which, we say, sees, is to be determined by moving my finger towards my eye according to the second criterion, then it is conceivable that I may see with what, according to other criteria, is the tip of my nose or places on my forehead, or I might in this way point to a place lying outside my body. If I wish a person to point to his eye or his eyes, according to the second criterion alone, I shall express my wish by saying, quote, point to your geometrical eye or eyes, quote. The grammar of the word geometrical eye stands in the same relation to the grammar of the word physical eye as the grammar of the expression the visual sense datum of a tree to the grammar of the expression the physical tree. In either case, it confuses everything to say, quote, the one is a different kind of object from the other, quote. For those who say that a sense datum is a different kind of object from a physical object misunderstand the grammar of the word kind. Just as those who say that a number is a different kind of object from a numeral. They think they are making such a statement as a railway train, a railway station, and a railway car are different kinds of objects, whereas their statement is analogous to a railway train, a railway accident, and a railway law are different kinds of objects. What tempted me to say it is always I who see when anything is seen, I could also have yielded to by saying, whenever anything is seen, it is this which is seen, accompanying the word this by a gesture, embracing my visual field, but not meaning by this the particular objects which I happen to see at the moment. One might say I am pointing at the visual field as such, not at anything in it, and this only serves to bring out the senselessness of the former expression. Let us then discard the always in our expression. Then I can still express my solipsism by saying, quote, only what I see or see now is really seen. And here I am tempted to say, quote, although by the word I don't mean LW, it will do if the others understand I to mean LW, if just now I am in fact LW, quote. I could also express my claim by saying, I am the vessel of life. But mark, it is essential that everyone to whom I say this should be unable to understand me. It is essential the other should not be able to understand, quote, what I really mean, quote, though in practice he might do what I wish by conceding to me an exceptional position in his notation. But I wish it to be logically impossible that he should understand me. That is to say, it should be meaningless, not false, to say that he understands me. Thus, my expression is one of the many which is used on various occasions by philosophers and supposed to convey something to the person who says it, though essentially incapable of conveying anything to anyone else. Now, if for an expression to convey a meaning means to be accompanied by or to produce certain experiences, our expression may have all sorts of meanings, and I don't wish to say anything about them. But we are, as a matter of fact, misled into thinking that our expression has a meaning in the sense in which a non-metaphysical expression has. For we wrongly compare our case with one in which the other person can't understand what we say because he lacks a certain information. This remark can only become clear if we understand the connection between grammar and sense and nonsense. The meaning of a phrase for us is characterized by the use we make of it. The meaning is not a mental accompaniment to the expression. Therefore, the phrase, "I think I mean something by it," or "I'm sure I mean something by it," which we so often hear in philosophical discussions to justify the use of an expression, is for us no justification at all. We ask, "What do you mean?" i.e., how do you use this expression? If someone taught me the word bench and said that he sometimes or always put a stroke over it, thus bench with a line over it, and that this meant something to him, I should say, "I don't know what sort of idea you associate with this stroke, but it doesn't interest me unless you show me that there is a use for the stroke in the kind of calculus in which you wish to use the word bench. I want to play chess, and a man gives the white king a paper crown, leaving the use of the piece unaltered, but telling me that the crown has a meaning to him in the game, which he can't express by rules. I say, as long as it doesn't alter the use of the piece, it hasn't what I call a meaning." One sometimes hears that such a phrase as "this is here," when, while I say it, I point to a part of my visual field, has a kind of primitive meaning to me, although it can't impart information to anybody else. When I say, "only this is seen," I forget that a sentence may come ever so natural to us without having any use in our calculus of language. Think of the law of identity, A equals A, and how we sometimes try hard to get a hold of its sense, to visualize it, by looking at an object and repeating to ourselves such a sentence as, "This tree is the same thing as this tree." The gestures and images by which I apparently give this sentence sense are very similar to those which I use in the case of, quote, "only this is really seen." To get clear about philosophical problems, it is useful to become conscious of the apparently unimportant details of the particular situation in which we are inclined to make a certain metaphysical assertion. Thus, we may be tempted to say, quote, "only this is really seen," quote, when we stare at unchanging surroundings, whereas we may not at all be tempted to say this when we look about us while walking. There is, as we have said, no objection to adopting a symbolism in which a certain person always or temporarily holds an exceptional place. And therefore, if I utter the sentence, quote, "only I really see," it is conceivable that my fellow creatures thereupon will arrange their notation so as to fall in with me by saying, quote, "so-and-so is really seen," quote, instead of, quote, "LW sees so-and-so," quote, etc., etc. What, however, is wrong is to think that I can justify this choice of notation. When I said from my heart that only I see, I was also inclined to say that by I didn't really mean LW. Although for the benefit of my fellow men, I might say, it is now LW who really sees, though this is not what I really mean. I could almost say that by I mean something which just now inhabits LW, something which the others can't see. I meant my mind, but could only point to it via my body. There is nothing wrong in suggesting that the others should give me an exceptional place in their notation, but the justification which I wish to give for it, that this body is now the seat of that which really lives, is senseless. For admittedly, this is not to state anything which in the ordinary sense is a matter of experience. And don't think that it is an experiential proposition which only I can know, because only I am in the position to have the particular experience. Now, the idea that the real I lives in my body is connected with the peculiar grammar of the word I, and the misunderstandings this grammar is liable to give rise to. There are two different cases in the use of the word I, or my, which I might call the use as an object and the use as a subject. Examples of the first kind of use are these. Again, the use as an object. Quote, my arm is broken. I have grown 6 inches. I have a bump on my forehead. The wind blows my hair about. Examples of the second kind are, again, the use as a subject. I see so-and-so. I hear so-and-so. I try to lift my arm. I think it will rain. I have a toothache. One can point to the difference between these two categories by saying, the cases of the first category involve the recognition of a particular person, and there is in these cases the possibility of an error, or, as I should rather put it, the possibility of an error has been provided for. The possibility of failing to score has been provided for in a pin game. On the other hand, it is not one of the hazards of the game that the ball should fail to come up if I have put a penny in the slot. It is possible that, say in an accident, I should feel a pain in my arm, see a broken arm at my side, and think it is mine, when really it is my neighbor's. And I could, looking into a mirror, mistake a bump on his forehead for one in mine. On the other hand, there is no question of recognizing a person when I say I have a toothache. To ask, are you sure it's you who have pains, would be nonsensical. Now, when in this case no error is possible, it is because the move, which we might be inclined to think of as an error, a bad move, is no move of the game at all. We distinguish in chess between good and bad moves, and we call it a mistake if we expose the queen to a bishop. But it is no mistake to promote a pawn to a king. And now this way of stating our idea suggests itself that it is as impossible that in making the statement, I have a toothache, I should have mistaken another person for myself, as it is to moan with pain by mistake, having mistaken someone else for me. To say I have a pain is no more a statement about a particular person than moaning is. But surely the word I in the mouth of a man refers to the man who says it. It points to himself, and very often a man who says it actually points to himself with his finger. But it was quite superfluous to point to himself. He might just as well only have raised his hand. It would be wrong to say that when someone points to the sun with his hand, he is pointing both to the sun and himself, because it is he who points. On the other hand, he may, by pointing, attract attention both to the sun and to himself. The word I does not mean the same as LW, even if I am LW. Nor does it mean the same as the expression, quote, the person who is now speaking, quote. But that doesn't mean that LW and I mean different things. All it means is that these words are different instruments in our language. Think of words as instruments characterized by their use, and then think of the use of a hammer, the use of a chisel, the use of a square, of a glue pot, and of the glue. Also, all that we say here can be understood only if one understands that a great variety of games is played with the sentences of our language, giving and obeying orders, asking questions and answering them, describing an event, telling a fictitious story, telling a joke, describing an immediate experience, making conjectures about events in the physical world, making scientific hypotheses and theories, greeting someone, etc., etc. The mouth which says I, or the hand which is raised to indicate that it is I who wish to speak, or I who have a toothache, does not thereby point to anything. If, on the other hand, I wish to indicate the place of my pain, I point. And here again, remember the difference between pointing to the painful spot without being led by the eye, and on the other hand, pointing to a scar on my body after looking for it. For example, that's where I was vaccinated. The man who cries out with pain or says that he has pain doesn't choose the mouth which says it. All this comes to saying that the person of whom we say he has pain is, by the rules of the game, the person who cries, contorts his face, etc. The place of the pain, as we have said, may be in another person's body. If, in saying I point to my own body, I model the use of the word I on that of the demonstrative, quote, this person, quote, or, quote, he, quote. This way of making the two expressions similar is somewhat analogous to that which one sometimes adopts in mathematics, say in the proof that the sum of the three angles of a triangle is 180 degrees. We say A equals A prime, B equals B prime, and Y equals Y. The first two equalities are of an entirely different kind from the third. In, quote, I have pain, quote, I is not a demonstrative pronoun. Compare the two cases. 1. How do you know that he has pains? Because I hear him moan. 2. How do you know that you have pains? Because I feel them. But I feel them means the same as I have them. Therefore, this was no explanation at all. That, however, in my answer I am inclined to stress the word feel and not the word I, indicates that by I don't wish to pick out one person from amongst different persons. The difference between the propositions I have pain and he has pain is not that of LW has pain and Smith has pain. Rather, it corresponds to the difference between moaning and saying that someone moans. But surely the word I and I have pain serves to distinguish me from other people, because it is by the sign I that I distinguish saying that I have pain from saying that one of the others has. Imagine a language in which, instead of I found nobody in the room, one said, I found Mr. Nobody in the room. Imagine the philosophical problems which would arise out of such a convention. Some philosophers brought up in this language would probably feel that they didn't like the similarity of the expressions Mr. Nobody and Mr. Smith. When we feel that we wish to abolish the I and I have pain, one may say that we tend to make the verbal expression of pain similar to the expression by moaning. We are inclined to forget that it is the particular use of a word only which gives the word its meaning. Let us think of our old example for the use of words. Someone is sent to the grocer with a slip of paper with the words 5 apples written on it. The use of the word in practice is its meaning. Imagine it were the usual thing that the objects around us carried labels with words on them, by means of which our speech referred to the objects. Some of these words would be proper names of objects, others generic names, like table, chair, etc. Others, again, names of colors, names of shapes, etc. That is to say, a label would only have a meaning to us insofar as we made a particular use of it. Now we could easily imagine ourselves to be impressed by merely seeing a label on a thing, and to forget that what makes these labels important is their use. In this way, we sometimes believe that we have named something when we make the gesture of pointing and utter words like this is X, the formula of the ostensive definition. We say we call something a toothache and think that the word has received a definite function in the dealings we carry out with language, when, under certain circumstances, we have pointed to our cheek and said, this is a toothache. Our idea is that when we point and the other, quote, only knows what we are pointing to, quote, he knows the use of the word. And here we have in mind the special case when what we point to is, say, a person, and to know that I point to means to see which of the persons present I point to. We feel then that in the cases in which I is used as a subject, we don't use it because we recognize a particular person by his bodily characteristics, and this creates the illusion that we use this word to refer to something bodiless, which, however, has its seat in our body. In fact, this seems to be the real ego, the one of which it was said, cogito ergo sum. Is there then no mind, but only a body? Answer: the word mind has a meaning, i.e., it has a use in our language. But saying this doesn't yet say what kind of use we make of it. In fact, one may say that what in these investigations we were concerned with was the grammar of those words which describe what are called mental activities, seeing, hearing, feeling, etc. And this comes to the same as saying that we are concerned with the grammar of phrases describing sense data. Philosophers say it as a philosophical opinion or conviction that there are sense data. But to say that I believe that there are sense data comes to saying that I believe that an object may appear to be before our eyes even when it isn't. Now, when one uses the term sense datum, one should be clear about the peculiarity of its grammar. For the idea in introducing this expression was to model expressions referring to appearance after expressions referring to reality. It was said, e.g., that if two things seem to be equal, there must be two somethings which are equal, which of course means nothing else but that we have decided to use such an expression as the appearances of these two things are equal, synonymously with these two things seem to be equal. Queerly enough, the introduction of this new phraseology has deluded people into thinking that they had discovered new entities, new elements of the structure of the world, as though to say, I believe that there are sense data, were similar to saying, I believe that matter consists of electrons. When we talk of the equality of appearances or sense data, we introduce a new usage of the word equal. It is possible that the lengths A and B should appear to us to be equal, that B and C should appear to be equal, but that A and C do not appear to be equal. And in the new notation, we shall have to say that though the appearance, sense datum, of A is equal to that of B, and the appearance of B equal to that of C, the appearance of A is not equal to the appearance of C, which is all right if you don't mind using equal intransitively. Now, the danger we are in when we adopt the sense datum notation is to forget the difference between the grammar of a statement about sense data and the grammar of an outwardly similar statement about physical objects. From this point, one might go on talking about the misunderstandings which find their expression in such sentences as, we can never see an accurate circle, or all our sense data are vague. Also, this leads to the comparison of the grammar of position, motion, and size in Euclidean and in visual space. There is, e.g., absolute position, absolute motion, and size in visual space. Now we can make use of such an expression as pointing to the appearance of a body or pointing to a visual sense datum. Roughly speaking, this sort of pointing comes to the same as sighting, say, along the barrel of a gun. Thus we may point and say, quote, this is the direction in which I see my image in the mirror, quote. One can also use such an expression as, quote, the appearance or sense datum of my finger points to the sense datum of the tree, quote, and similar ones. From these cases of pointing, however, we must distinguish those of pointing in the direction a sound seems to come from, or of pointing to my forehead with closed eyes, etc. Now, when in the solipsistic way I say, quote, this is what's really seen, quote, I point before me, and it is essential that I point visually If I pointed sideways or behind me, as it were, to things which I don't see, the pointing would, in this case, be meaningless to me. It would not be pointing in the sense in which I wish to point. But this means that when I point before me saying, quote, this is what's really seen, quote, although I make the gesture of pointing, I don't point to one thing as opposed to another. This is as when traveling in a car and feeling in a hurry. I instinctively press against something in front of me, as though I could push the car from inside. When it makes sense to say, I see this, or this is seen, pointing to what I see, it also makes sense to say, I see this, or this is seen, pointing to something I don't see. When I made my solipsistic statement, I pointed, but I robbed the pointing of its sense by inseparably connecting that which points and that to which it points. I constructed a clock with all its wheels, etc., and in the end fastened the dial to the pointer and made it go round with it. And in this way, the solipsist, quote, only this is really seen, quote, reminds us of a tautology. Of course, one of the reasons why we are tempted to make our pseudo-statement is its similarity with the statement, I only see this, or this is the region which I see, where I point to certain objects around me as opposed to others, or in a certain direction in physical space, not in visual space, as opposed to other directions in physical space. And if, pointing in this sense, I say, this is what is really seen, one may answer me, this is what you, LW, see. But there is no objection to adopting a notation in which what we used to call things which LW sees is called, quote, things really seen. If, however, I believe that by pointing to that which in my grammar has no neighbor, I can convey something to myself, if not to others, I make a mistake similar to that of thinking that the sentence, I am here, makes sense to me, and by the way, is always true, under conditions different from those very special conditions under which it does make sense. E.g., when my voice and the direction from which I speak is recognized by another person. Again, an important case where you can learn that a word has meaning by the particular use we make of it. We are like people who think that pieces of wood, shaped more or less like chess or draft pieces, and standing on a chessboard, make a game, even if nothing has been said as to how they are to be used. To say, it approaches me, has sense, and when, physically speaking, nothing approaches my body. And in the same way, it makes sense to say, it is here, or it has reached me, when nothing has reached my body. And on the other hand, I am here makes sense, if my voice is recognized and heard to come from a particular place of common space. In the sentence, it is here, the here was a here in visual space. Roughly speaking, it is the geometrical I. The sentence, I am here, to make sense, must attract attention to a place in common space. And there are several ways in which this sentence might be used. The philosopher who thinks it makes sense to say to himself, I am here, takes the verbal expression from the sentence in which here is a place in common space, and thinks of here as the here in visual space. He therefore really says something like, here is here. I could, however, try to express my solipsism in a different way. I imagine that I and others draw pictures or write descriptions of what each of us sees. These descriptions are put before me. I point to the one which I have made and say, only this was really seen. That is, I am tempted to say, only this description has reality, visual reality, behind it. The others I might call blank descriptions. I could also express myself by saying, This description only was derived from reality. Only this was compared with reality. Now it has a clear meaning when we say that this picture or description is a projection, say, of this group of objects, the trees I look at, or that it has been derived from these objects. But we must look into the grammar of such a phrase as, this description is derived from my sense datum. What we are talking about is connected with that peculiar temptation to say, I never know what the other really means by brown, or what he really sees when he truthfully says that he sees a brown object. We could propose to one who says this to use two different words instead of the one word brown. One word for his particular impression, the other word with that meaning which other people besides himself can understand as well. If he thinks about this proposal, he will see that there is something wrong in his conception of the meaning, function of the word brown and others. He looks for a justification of his description where there is none. Just as in the case when a man believes that the chain of reasons must be endless. Think of the justification by a general formula for performing mathematical operations, and of the question, does this formula compel us to make use of it in this particular case, as we do? To say I derive a description from visual reality can't mean anything analogous to I derive a description from what I see here. I may, e.g., see a chart in which a colored square is correlated to the word brown, and also a patch of the same color elsewhere. And I may say, this chart shows me that I must use the word brown for the description of this patch. This is how I may derive the word which is needed in my description. But it would be meaningless to say that I derive the word brown from the particular color impression which I receive. Let us now ask, can a human body have pain? One is inclined to say, how can the body have pain? The body in itself is something dead. A body isn't conscious. And here again, it is as though we looked into the nature of pain and saw that it lies in its nature, that a material object can't have it. And it is as though we saw that what has pain must be an entity of a different nature from that of a material object, that in fact it must be of a mental nature. But to say that the ego is mental is like saying that the number 3 is of a mental or immaterial nature, when we recognize that the numeral 3 isn't used as a sign for a physical object. On the other hand, we can perfectly well adopt the expression, this body feels pain. And we shall then, just as usual, tell it to go to the doctor, to lie down, and even to remember that when the last time it had pains, they were over in a day. But wouldn't this form of expression at least be an indirect one? Well, is it using an indirect expression when we say write 3 for x in this formula instead of substitute 3 for x? Or on the other hand, is the first of these two expressions the only direct one, as some philosophers think? One expression is no more direct than the other. The meaning of the expression depends entirely on how we go on using it. Let's not imagine the meaning as an occult connection the mind makes between a word and a thing, and that this connection contains the whole usage of a word, as the seed might be said to contain the tree. The kernel of our proposition that that which has pains or sees or thinks is of a mental nature is only that the word I in I have pains does not denote a particular body, for we can't substitute for I a description of a body. Now that concludes the lectures in my class called philosophy. Thank you for listening. It has been a good year for our investigations. We will see you next trimester. Thank you.